even claimed that on his deathbed, Rollo had 100 men decapitated to appease the pagan gods. But Rollo and his successors turned to Christianity with the same energy that they had applied to conquest. His ancestors had burned churches. They built them. And this monastery at Mont Saint-Michel was one of their favourite projects.
The monastery of Mont Saint-Michel was founded on an island off the coast of Normandy in the 8th century. It soon became one of the major Christian pilgrimage sites. It's dedicated to the Archangel St. Michael, the warrior saint. So it's little surprise that the Normans came to worship here. By the middle of the 10th century, they were Mont Saint-Michel's most generous sponsors. They built the oldest part of the monastery. It lies behind this door.
This is the chapel of Notre-Dame sous terre, Our Lady beneath the ground. It was built in the 10th century during the reign of Duke Richard I, Rollo's grandson, and is the earliest surviving example of Norman architecture.
It's a simple chapel, typical of the French style of the era, with its plain arches, rectangular supports, and small windows. But within 50 years, Norman ambition and vision inspired the construction of a magnificent church just above this modest little chapel. This is the great Abbey Church of Saint-Michel. It builds on the architecture of Imperial Rome, with its round arches and monumental columns. Historians label it Romanesque. This was the most widespread style of architecture since the fall of the Roman Empire. This church was a statement in stone. The Normans were here to stay. In less than 150 years, the pagan men from the north had become master builders of Christianity.
Places like Mont Saint-Michel showed off the Normans' growing faith, wealth, and pride. And in return for building the abbeys, the monks would pray for their souls. Like most people in the Middle Ages, the Normans believed that God would punish them for their sins, and they might spend all eternity burning in hellfire. The monasteries were a kind of insurance policy, religious castles where the monks engaged in endless spiritual warfare against Satan on their behalf.
But their piety and church building didn't mean the Normans had any intention of laying down their swords. Tenth century France offered new ways to express this urge to command and conquer. They'd already moved from raiding to government and replaced pagan shrines with churches, Now the Normans would exchange their longboats for horses, reinventing themselves as knights.
The word knight summons up images of chivalric warriors, figures in plate armour, aristocratic heroes devoted to their ladies, Lancelot and Percival. But the reality was quite different. The first knights were simply armoured men on horseback and could be a very rough crowd. Some of them were little better than brutal thugs.
These hard warriors were given years of training. Cavalry warfare was a tough and highly demanding discipline. Training was long, arduous, and cost a great deal of money, not least for the armour and weaponry, the helmets, iron mail coats, spears and swords, and above all, their horses.
People in the Middle Ages knew their horses well, intimately. There's a wonderful story of a man who could tell by picking up manure and sniffing it whether it came from wild donkeys fed on grass or from war horses that had been eating oats. It enabled him to tell, of course, whether there were enemies in the neighbourhood.
Fighting on horseback defined a new kind of warfare. The shock tactics of heavy cavalry must have been physically and psychologically devastating.
The Normans were becoming the most ferocious cavalry in Europe. It made them a wonderful machine for conquest.
Horseback warfare also left a powerful social legacy. In most European languages, the word for knight, chevalier, caballero, ritter, simply means horseman. But it soon came to signify both honour and status. Knights became a vital part of the new social hierarchy. As the Normans sharpened their military skills, they were also learning another important lesson: how to consolidate power. This too involved building. Wooden fortifications, known as motte and bailey castles, sprang up across the region. Quick and easy to build, they were used as bases for attack and then for the defence of captured land.
And here, deep in the forest of Grimbeau, are the remains of an early motte and bailey castle. Here, there's an enormous earth mound, now covered with trees, made by digging the soil out from a surrounding ditch. This is the motte. Here, there would have been a defensive wall made of wood, a stockade. And this place would have served as a lookout point and an emergency refuge for the lord and his men. Below was the bailey, a level area also protected by a defensive wall of wood, used as living quarters and to house the horses.
These fortifications were a statement of aristocratic power and domination. Soon, like their churches, they would be rebuilt in stone, great monuments of aggression and permanence. This was the land into which the most famous of all the Normans was born in 1027. A man who more than any other ensured that Norman power would spread far beyond Normandy. No wonder the conception of the new duke became the stuff of legend, with the strange dream of Herleva, the embalmer's daughter.
Herleva said that she felt something begin to stir and grow in her belly. it came out of her body and turned into an enormous tree, so vast that it overshadowed Normandy and the Kingdom of England. She had just conceived William the Conqueror.
First, this illegitimate son of the Duke of Normandy was known as William the Bastard, and he was born into a world of danger. When his father died in 1035, William was just 8 years old. With the duchy in the hands of a child, the Norman aristocracy saw their chance to grab power.
William's rivals circled. One night, as the young Duke was sleeping, his steward, Osborne, sleeping in the bed beside him, had his throat cut. In fact, every one of William's guardians was assassinated. On another occasion, according to legend, William had to make a quick escape at night, getting away on horseback in just his underclothes and fording a raging river at midnight.
Normandy was in turmoil. The chronicler William of Jumièges described the chaos. Plots were hatched and rebellions, and all the duchy was ablaze with fire.
The violence was sickening. Rivals were abducted and mutilated. One Norman lord who went to a wedding feast came away without ears, eyes, or genitals. Amazingly, he survived and ended his days as a monk.
The young Duke hung on for 12 years. Then, in 1047, when he was 20 years old, he faced a full-blown revolt. It was launched by his cousin Guy, who had mustered the backing of the greater part of Normandy.
William confronted the rebels here at Valais-Dune. He'd called on the aid of the French king, Henry I, but William didn't need much help. He charged into the carnage, terrifying his enemies with brute force. When they fled the battlefield, it said that he pursued them relentlessly for miles. Many were hacked down, others drowned as they tried to cross the River Orne.
The Battle of Valais-Dune was the making of the young Duke. Nothing could stop him now. William set about restoring order to the Norman state. He built a new capital here at Caen, complete with the two indispensable expressions of Norman power: a castle and two abbeys, the Abbaye aux Hommes for men and the Abbaye aux Dames for women. Next, to secure his dynasty, came marriage.